Alright, so welcome to another filmmaking tutorial. My name is Tomantos, and today I'm going to talk about basically getting the right exposure. You could use a light meter, which they're great, but they don't always work if you have a lot of things, for example, in front of your lens. Things like let's say a variable ND filter, which will basically throw off all your calculations. Um, and also that they're just expensive. Now, a lot of cameras nowadays have basically built-in light meters, so you can use that as well. But personally, I don't think that works all that best, for a lot of these situations that I find myself in. So if you look at, for example, this example that is shot using the Canon 7D and the stock lens that came with it, which is a pretty bad zoom lens, goes down to f 3.5. Then using a built-in light meter gives me a pretty decent exposure. But if I were to shoot that same setup using, for example, a Nikon lens on a Canon camera, then as you can see up here, if I set the exposure according to the built-in light meter, the final effect is a lot basically brighter than what I got using the Canon lens. That's actually something because due to the Canon digital SLRs, I think it just throws off the built-in light meter if you're not using the Canon lenses, I'm guessing. Anyways, now to try to get that same image, using a Nikon lens, I would actually, in fact, have to, according to the built-in light meter, underexpose by about almost 2 f-stops, which gives me this final result, which again looks pretty similar now to the Nikon lens. So as you can see, built-in light meter doesn't always work, doesn't always give you the right kind of result. So what I use instead is actually the histograms. Histograms are basically a great way to look at how much information you have in a certain part of your image. So if you're using the red camera, you can view your scene live and have the histogram kind of update live for you. If you're using let's say Canon digital SLRs, if you simply take a still picture of your scene or let's say a short video clip and then play back the image and then click the info button above the playback button and then clicking once more to cycle basically through to the histogram, then you can actually you can see basically if you're getting the correct exposure. And basically those the spikes that you see there, that kind of waveform, it just shows you the amount of information you have in that particular part of the image. If you have more of those spikes sort of on the left side, that means that basically it's underexposed, or that not necessarily that it's underexposed, that you have a lot of information in the dark areas. A lot of pixels are basically really dark, and then the more you go to the right side, then the brighter it is. So let's say if you're looking at this kind of standard setup, you're looking for an average overall well-balanced exposure, meaning you don't want anything to be too much on the left side, too much on the right side. You kind of want the information to start sort of from the darks, then sort of slowly sort of grow, and then have the most of its information to be in the midtones, and then kind of drop off and in the highlights. Which basically, if you look at this image, that's what it's showing you. Now, if you look at the red, green, and blue, you'll see that, for example, in the red channel, because again, by looking at the setup with my bare eyes, I can see that most of the colors in this scene are kind of brownish, yellowish, which would mean that there's going to be a lot of red, a lot of warm kind of pixels in this image, and that kind of is confirmed again by the histogram. It's showing me that it's again properly balanced, the colors and all that stuff, because most of the information there is in the red channel and some of it in the green channel, and then the blue, which is again a color that you don't see much of in this setup. It's sort of more just in the shadows, in the kind of on the left side of the histogram. In this setup, basically again the same camera angle, the same lens, so on, and all we have is these kind of just very soft sort of equal light all over both the foreground and the background objects. And just looking at it again, I know that most of the colors in this scene are kind of brownish yellowish, meaning more information is going to be in the red channel. On top of that, there's no really any bright highlights or anything like that, so there shouldn't be any spikes kind of going off the scale, especially in the highlights, meaning on the right side of the histogram. And And there's not a lot of shadows. I mean, there's some shadows there you can see in the background and a little bit here in the bottom left corner, that table that you're seeing. But it's, most of it is pretty well balanced. So now let's take a look at the histogram. And as you can see right away, it shows you that it's sort of the histogram confirms sort of what I would expect. Um, Again, you can see all the way on the left side, there's nothing there in the shadows. Then slowly as we go into midtones, it rises. There's a steady amount of information. Then there's that big spike there in the center of the histogram, meaning that kind of neutral, kind of middle of the road kind of gray. There's a lot of information there, and I know that that's true simply because looking at this figurine, it's basically kind of looks kind of grayish, but with a warmth kind of colors to it. But it's not overexposed, for example. It is a white figurine, but if I was overexposing it, then it would just be pure washed out white. And then again, looking at the red, green, and blue, I can see most of the information is in the red channel, green a little bit less, and then very little information only in the shadows and when it comes to blue. Now here's that same setup, the same lights and everything, but just we changed the shutter speed, so we actually overexposed the image a bit. Again, you can see that it's the histogram has a huge spike now, sort of a little bit to the right side of the center. It just goes off the scale. And again, in the red channel especially, you can see that there's no information in the shadows, and everything is just out there in the highlights. And there's like these two big spikes in the highlights. And that kind of should give you some warning signs that this image might be slightly overexposed. Now this isn't actually horribly overexposed. As you can see that there's still a lot of detail there in the figurine, even though it is a white figurine. That if you overexpose it, really it should just be blown out, completely just white, washed out kind of looking pixels. But we still have some information there, and so in reality, if you had this image, you could still basically take it in post-production. You can adjust the curves and you could kind of make it look how you wanted it. Now, if I were to again look at that same setup, same lights and everything, but underexposed by, well, I guess up here by about an f-stop, then you can see again that just looking at the top histogram there, the Luma histogram, it is, yeah, most all of the information is in the shadows, and then a little bit there in the midtones, and then just completely drops off, and there's nothing in the highlights. So again, that would send warning signs. And to me, if I looked at this and you just simply say, well, I know the figurine is white, I should have a lot more information in the highlights, and basically this is an image that's underexposed. Now, if we were to underexpose it even further, then this is how the histogram would look. Again, you can see it now. It's just completely, everything's just in the shadows. Again, just talking about the Luma histogram. A lot of information and spikes there in the dark areas, and then it just kind of drops off, and nothing in the midtones, nothing in the highlights. Same thing if you go to the reverse and you completely overexpose it by about 2 f-stops or no 2.5 f-stops overexposed. You can see again, and looking at the histogram, nothing in the shadows, which is weird because we know that there's there's a lot of shadows there in the background, and there should be something there on the edge of the table, and there's no information there. A little bit of information there in the midtones, and then everything is on the right side of the histogram, right? And then there's a big spike, and then again it rises up and it spikes right at all the way on the right side of the histogram. So basically, next time you're out there filming, just set up your scene, your camera, lights, everything, and then just take let's say a still picture if you're using the digital SLRs, or a short little video clip, and then play it back and just look at your histogram just to see if you're if you're getting the right kind of exposure. If you're not, make your necessary adjustments, and then again take a still picture, take a look at the histogram, and until you're basically satisfied with it. Also, I've been getting a lot of emails with regards to my last film, Dinner Date. This is basically people asking me where they can see the finished film. If you've seen some of my previous tutorials, and you noticed I've used a lot of examples from that film. We also basically decided to release the film as on a DVD, basically as a kind of a special edition with a lot of behind the scenes, a lot of basically tutorials talking about basically how we made the whole film on a really low budget. And I wanted to know basically if you're interested in purchasing this DVD, and if so, what kind of things you'd like me to talk about in it. So far, I mean, more or less what I plan to show is pretty much everything right from the beginning, sort of from the pre-production stage, planning this, even writing the script, planning, the shoot, scouting locations, adding kind of production value by using kind of available locations to you and things like that, to buying basically cheap, second hand or so on, lighting equipment and camera equipment, and then to the actual setup of shots, and then some of the little editing tricks that I used in post production. In that film. If you guys have any specific requests or things you'd like me to talk about in this DVD, let me know. And also, once again, if you're whether you have any questions or suggestions, or you're just simply interested in buying the DVD, please email me. The email address that's provided in the description of this video. Thank you, and I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Before I go, I'm just gonna basically play you a trailer of the film Dinner Date. Right, thanks, see you next time.
So how'd your date with Mike go?
Meh. Seriously, there's not much to say. Mike came over, ate in a couple of minutes, then dropped his pants and was finished before I even got my top off.
So how'd it go with Anna last night?
Amazing.
Oh,